everyone, welcome to the studio. I am about to paint a spring landscape, and what I want to share with you in this spring landscape painting is a tip to help you have more success with a spring landscape, because I find spring landscapes to be probably the most challenging season to paint. Why? Well, you have this riot of color that is, unusual, bright, bold colors, pinks and purples and magentas and corals and all these wonderful colors that we don't always see in the landscape. And the problem is, and it's not really a problem, it's actually quite joyful, is that they're all at one time. And I live in the southeast. I live just outside of Atlanta, and spring is absolutely gorgeous here. We have every color, but it's out all at once. Then what's happening is the spring greens are starting to emerge, and it is just overwhelming. So when you go to paint it, it's just sometimes looks, I don't know, maybe like a kid did it, because it's like you got the whole crayon box out and got to color. So I want to share with you today in a demo how you can simplify a spring landscape painting. And that is truly the key, is you want to simplify. You want to choose a main color scheme and go with it, and not try to put every color in the painting. So what I like to suggest is, if you're going to do a spring landscape, try to simplify your approach and how much you're going to put in, and say, maybe I can make 3 paintings out of this scene instead of trying to put it all into one scene. So I've got a complicated landscape photo that I want to share with you, and I'm going to go through the steps of simplifying this, hopefully. And as you can see in my photo, it's a pathway through some azaleas, and it's just a riot of color, a lot of busyness going on. So I want to do my best to simplify, and that is truly the tip that I want to share with you. And so how can we simplify? Well, we're going to start by having a very simple underpainting. So if we can start with big, simple shapes, then we can decide just how much detail we're going to put in those flowers. So what I want you to do is stick with me, because the underpainting stage isn't going to look like much, but as the painting progresses, hopefully we'll be able to pull it all together. So I was looking on my shelf today, and I thought, what can I use to simplify these big shapes? What can I use for an underpainting, or how can I block this in? And I found these pastels. These are, right here, these are hand-rolled pastels from Jack Richeson, and they're pastel squares or blocks that they recommend them for using for underpainting or for blocking in your background. Because of the square shape, you have a lot more real estate on the pastel, and it goes a lot further, and you can use your regular sticks less, because you've blocked in with these larger squares. It's a really great square shape. I picked these up at the pastel convention, the IAPS convention last summer, and so I haven't really put them to the test. I am going to do a complete and thorough review of these. I will be putting it up on my Patreon page sometime in the future, in the next couple of weeks. So if you're interested in seeing a complete review of this and a lot of other things are on the Patreon page, head over there and have a look. I'd love to have you join us. Alright, so I already did the initial drawing of my big simple shapes, and I'm going to tighten down my board a little bit. By the way, this is just regular foam core, and I use artist tape hinges to attach my board, my paper to the board. This is a piece of sanded paper, MingArt paper, that I got. Also, I got this at the convention. So I'm using up my convention stuff. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to block in the darkest areas. And the darkest areas happen to be the tree trunks. So I'm going to just go ahead and put in some of these trunks. And one thing I am doing, what I'm going to try to do, is I'm not copying my photograph exactly. Why? There's too much information. I need to simplify what's in my photograph. So I'll just put in a few trunks, and my goal is to make sure that the spacing or the intervals are unequal, which is going to be more interesting. Also, the size of the tree trunks, I want them to be different. So thick ones, and this one could be a little bit thicker. And of course I'm going to adjust these. But here's those darks. I'm going to use this dark purple. Now I think the idea is you take off the wrapper so that you can block in with the side. And yeah, that takes a lot less pastel to cover the larger areas. So I'm just blocking in all the dark areas. You see I'm starting to put an indication of the shadows on my pathway. And I'm just going to darken the foreground right there. Alright, then we have these wonderful, colorful azaleas. So I'm going to block these in. What if my goal for this initial block-in is to get big, simple shapes? Big, simple shapes. And then I will then have the ability to decide what is going to be detailed. I'm trying to paint and talk and think at the same time, and sometimes that doesn't go hand in hand. We have this orange leaves on the trees coming in here. Remember I said in my introduction that sometimes in spring we just have such a riot of colors, it's just overwhelming. And to me that's a case of, yeah, it really was there in real life, but to me it's almost too much color going on. So I'm going to not put in that orange tree. I'm going to actually make this a little bit magenta, and I'm going to carry these colors throughout. Now one thing that I didn't get in these squares that I picked up at the convention is I didn't pick up a lot of green. But I have some blue greens, and I think that'll work for my distant areas. Trees in the distance. And then what do I want to put up in the sky? I don't have it with these squares, so I'm going to move these aside for now. And I was just playing with these. That's one of the things I love to do, is just experiment and play with things that I've never used before. I'm going to just block in a blue sky up in here. And I can always add the foliage on top. And then we need the pathway, which I'm going to make a pale peach, like so. Actually going to darken that shadows. I'll talk more about that in just a minute. Alright, so this is my block-in. The next thing I'm going to do is take a piece of pipe insulation foam, and I'm going to rub in the pastel that I just applied so that I can soften things and throw things out of focus. Why do I want to throw things out of focus? Because I want to have a very, very soft and dreamy, simplified landscape, which would then allow me to decide where I'm going to put the detail. Because if I start with things that are just way too much information, like there is in my photograph, then I'm going to get too busy too quickly, and then before I know it, I'll have just a big mess on my hands. Alright, so there's the simplified block-in, and this is the whole idea of the simplified block-in. We get all the shapes, we assign it a color and a value. I'm going darker and bolder than I want it to be, and I'm going to come back to this with my soft pastels, and I'll be right back. Alright, I'm back. The dog was itching herself, so it was I know, sounded a little bit crazy. But it gave me a chance to take a picture of the underpainting, which is something I suggest you do, because it's always useful to see what it looks like before you start adding a lot more pastel. And I'm really enjoying these really vibrant colors from those Jack Richeson squares. So we'll see where that goes. Alright, so what am I going to do now is I'm going to use some Terry Ludwig pastels. This is my set of my selection. They're called the Floral Landscape. So here we go. We got a floral landscape, so let's see how it does. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to reinforce the dark areas. So if you recall, the darks were the trunks, the tree trunks. And I'm using a dark blue. And I'm making sure that I keep a variety of shapes, widths, intervals, spacing, because your brain is going to want to organize them, and before you know it, you have soldiers lined up marching across your paper. So it's a constant battle to get things so that they're more interesting. So there's one dark. Let's add to that dark. I'm going to add another layer. This is a dark burgundy. The trees that are further back, I want them, they're going to have to be a little bit lighter, so I'm not going to add any, where does this come out of? I'm not going to add any more pastel to that. In fact, I'll probably make them slightly lighter because I want them to feel like they're in the distance. So let's see if I can't get a, let's see, what can we do? They're kind of purple. Let's add a little violet to those guys in the distance. It'll help push them back a little bit. Okay. So where else was there dark? Well, there's some dark kind of at the base of some of these bushes. Now, going with the theme of simplifying a spring landscape, one of the other things that I'm trying to do is I have so many different bushes in this particular landscape that I want to just keep them simple. I don't want to have them too separated. So I'm trying to keep control over the amount of bush shapes that I have. I don't know if that makes any sense. I'm adding a dark green right now because we have a lot of the darker green foliage. I'm going to work on the shadows on the pathway right now. Okay, so the pathway is a little bit overexposed in my photo. I remember it being more like a pine straw type footpath. So I know that it's kind of got that little reddish salmon kind of tint to it. So the shadows are going to be a darker value of the path color with some influence of the sky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the darker kind of reddish first, and then the path kind of sneaks around the corner. And then I'm going to scumble over that a little bit of blue, a dark blue. It needs to be darker. And that's going to give me the shadow color. So it's a darker version of the color of the actual path with a little bit of influence of the sky. So I'm going to scumble over some of the blue of the sky. And when I come in with the light, you'll see the difference. But I wanted to establish the darker shadows first. All right. Where is the light coming from? That's always important. So obviously, if the shadows are being cast over to your left, there's light coming from the right. So let's remind ourselves, put a little sun mark, and that means I can start to add some light on the sides of the tree trunks. I'm going to do that right now before I go too far into it. So I'm adding a lighter value violet first of all. And those tree trunks kind of have a reddish feeling to them, so I'm going to put in a little red violet. And then I'll put some over here on this guy. Stagger that a little bit. And then I look at them and I say, well, but there are some darker areas on the shadow side, so I'm using my darkest value pastel I have in this set. And I'm putting it up the sides of some of the trunks. Not the trunks in the distance. Remember, those are further back, so they wouldn't be quite as dark. I'm also going to use this dark to emphasize the shadowed area underneath these bushes in the foreground, like so. And then we'll come back and kind of integrate those shadows. Alright, so now before I do the pathway, I think I'm going to work on the background and work my way forward. So in the background, what was our goal for a spring landscape? It's to simplify. So that means I'm not going to put in every tree that I see, every bush that I see. I could certainly sit here and analyze it and really break it down, and I see so many interesting things back there, but again, it's too much information and then my painting would be too busy. So I'm just taking some kind of grayed down. Actually, I want to use that one. Let me make a correction. I'm going to use that mauve for the distant flowers. I'm using some grayed down blue greens to suggest all of the foliage in the distance, just to start off with. And then the sky, there's a little bit of blue sky peeking through. In my photo, that blue sky looks white. Again, it was overexposed. So I'm going to make it blue, and I'm going to just use two different blues to capture the sky peeking through the trees. And I see what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in these sky, the bits of sky, but then I'm going to come back over it again with the trunks, because what I've done is I've covered up some of the trunks that I need to have in place. So basically put some in, and then you're going to go in and take, well, I took them out, now I'm putting them back in, if that makes sense. So I'm restoring my tree trunks. Okay, what else is back there in the distance? There is some green stuff, but since it's further back, it can't be a bright green, right? So I'm going to use a dull gray green, just to hint at some of the green stuff in the distance. All that green stuff is going to be a cooler grayed down green. I think I have another one that will work. This is also a cooler green, a more neutral green rather. It's not a really bright, intense green. You know, you may be looking at the photo and say, but Karen, I do see some bright greens back there. But if I don't exaggerate this effect of the dullness in the distance, what's going to happen is your eye is going to look back there at the bright greens, and you're not going to look here where I want you to look. So I'm using the duller greens, and I see that I also just covered up my trunk again. I'm going to put that guy back in. Okay, so now I've got the distant, but there's some distant flowers back there. There's azaleas that are back there. Now, I know that they are just as colorful as the azaleas in the foreground, right? It's the same. They're the same bright pinks. But if I make them bright pink way in the distance like that, then what's going to happen is they're going to jump forward. So I have to use the duller pinks to suggest those flowers in the distance. So I'm also just using little tiny marks just to hint at the fact that there's flowers growing back there. So I'm using the duller pinks, kind of the salmony pinks, to hint at some of those bushes that are in the distance. There's also, let's see if I can do this. I like this nice blue violet. That's a pretty color. Alright, so I'm working my way forward, and now what I want to do is establish, I'm going to have to come back and fix this tree trunk a little bit better. I have to establish the flowers in the foreground. So let's go ahead. I really love the effect of those underpainting blocks. So, you know, Just going to add a little bit more of the green foliage before I go ahead and take time to do the pathway. And then what I'm going to do is pull everything together and decide where the detail is going. So let's go ahead and do the pathway now. So we have the shadows in place, so we need to put the light, and we want it to go around the corner. So I'm using a pale value peach in the distance, and as it comes forward it's going to get a little bit lighter and brighter, but I'm trying to vary the, actually is a lighter area right in here. Trying to get that dappled effect on the pathway. A little bit of light down in here. And we probably have to go and refine the shadow shapes a little bit more. We've got those lost a little bit. That's easy enough. Come back in. Also, the shadows are going to get more diffused as it moves away from the object. And in the back, I'm just going to soften it. And then we're going to come back. I'm going to do one thing. I'm going to spray everything with a little bit of Workable Fixative. I'll show you the can in just a second. This is Blair, very low odor, Workable Fixative. And I'm spraying everything because I want to come in and get this feeling of texture in the foliage. I'm going to do one thing while that's drying. I want to soften the edges just a little bit in this path. So I'm taking a hard pastel and just kind of scumbling over just to get a little variety, and then just a little harder edge back in there so that your eye goes back around the corner. Okay. We're going to come in and start making those final decisions of where we're going to get the focus. Where is the focus going to be? And I think it's going to be this main bush right in here. But then I want to pull your eye around to the distance, and there needs to be something interesting when you get around the distance. I think let's kind of add a little bit more clarity to some of these trunks. This guy needed to go a little bit lower. See how they were all kind of at the same height? So it got changed up a little bit, so I wanted to take a minute to make that change before I forgot. Alright, let's keep going with these bright pinks and corals. I'll throw a little bit of that. I like that color. Throw that over on that side. And there's a little bit of light coming in over here, so we'll give a little bit of light to these guys. And now let's figure out where our foliage is going to get some light. A little bit of light in there, a little bit of light in there. I really want to remind myself, got to keep things simple, got to keep things simple. Big, simple shapes. I'm still in that big, simple shape stage. I don't need to have a lot of detail on the edges of this particular painting because I really just want to pull you into the path. Okay, now I am at the point where I need to start adding the detail. So I am going to pull out my harder pastels, and I'm going to come in and add a few indications of the shape of those azalea blossoms. So I'm kind of coming in and putting a few chunky marks on the edges of these bushes. So I don't need to have every single flower, but if I put a few marks that are supposed to indicate, and I have to hold down on my board, the type of flowers these are, then hopefully the viewer's eye will fill in the rest, and you'll be able to say, ah, okay, those are some sort of spring flower. Hopefully they'll look like azaleas if you're familiar with them. And I just kind of want to dance these little flower blossoms across so that your eye moves around. Oops, that guy goes in here. What else? A few more. Now here's the part, and if you watch my videos, then you know I say this a lot. This is the part where you can get carried away. This is the part where I start looking at the photo and I start to become a slave to the photo. I start to say, oh, but I see this here, and I see this color here, and I see this mark here. And before I know it, I'm looking at the photo and I'm trying to copy the photo, and I'm not looking at the painting and seeing what the painting needs. Maybe the painting doesn't need as much as I see in the photo. And remember, what is the key for a spring landscape? It's simplification. All right, so I want to pull you down the path, but when you get to the end of the path, there should be a payoff. There should be something interesting. So there's a little bit brighter bushes back in there, so that when you go back there, there's something fun for you to look at. Maybe we could even have a nice spot of that really bright spring green back there, just to pull your eye back there, a little bit of eye candy. And then I got to put a few little indications of the foliage. So we've got the foliage in the sun. So for the foliage in the sun, I'm going to use a green that has more yellow in it, a warmer green, so we can get that feeling of the sunlight. A little bit of sunlight kind of meandering through the shadows and then over onto the other side of the path. I want the sunlit areas to line up with the sunlit areas out on the pathway. Where there's shadows, I can actually use darker greens, cooler greens in the shadows. And the last thing that I'm going to do is put a little bit more light on the tree trunk, because they kind of look like just dark blobs. So I'm using a pale purple, and I'm kind of scratching it on there to kind of make it look more like bark. That one needs to be a little bit lighter. Oh, we can put some, well actually, I've got an idea. So I'm just kind of smoothing those guys out. And if it's getting a little bit of light on it, it would have a warmer color. So let's see if I have, let's give it a little bit of sunlight on the edge. A little bit of peach over there. And then finally, remember I said earlier that we take branches out and then we have to put some back in. So there's a lot going on, but I think I can add just a hint at the busyness of this forest without putting in every single branch. I'm going to add a little bit more blue to my shadows on the path. And I also need to brighten it up just a little bit, lighten it rather. It's a little too peachy for me. I know I know that I said it was overexposed in the photo, but I think it's competing a little bit too much with the flowers. So I just want to lighten it up just a hair, and then add a few more leaves just to cover it up a little bit more. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my super dark and then just really darken the shadow area so that these flowers start to jump forward. So right at the base of the shadow, I'm just making it a little bit darker on both sides. I don't want it to look like dark blobs though, so I'm put them in and then I'm going to cover them up slightly. So I have come to the part in every painting where it is important for me to step away and to make sure that I kept it simple enough that I did everything I want to do. Is there any marks that I need to strengthen? Is there any marks that I need to take away? When I step back and I look at that, I see this is a little bit of a blob. I really like the this bright color right in here, so I don't want to get rid of it. I think I just need to extend this lighter color over a little bit more so it's not just in one spot. But when I get to this stage in a painting, I'm going to make a mark and then I'm going to step away, and I see that it's still like a blob, so the next thing I need to do, and I don't, oh, I'll just use this. I need to scrape away. I like the idea of sometimes it's not what you add, but it's what you take away. So I can come in and scrape through and actually make, this is kind of fun, draw in there and kind of pull out those blooms by outlining them. Then they actually look more like little flowers. Some in the shadows too. This is a bamboo skewer. And did I plan to do this? No. But it's kind of fun. So I'm going to stop now because I think I've given you enough information for today. Oh, I could even scrape into the tree trunk. I hope you've enjoyed this video, how to simplify or paint a spring landscape. The key is keep it simple for as long as you possibly can, and then you know just how much detail to put in. So I hope you've enjoyed this demo, and I'll see you next time.